The lions have been on the move, and Africa has been growing over the last 10 years at the second fastest rate of any region in the world. What people don't understand is that also Africa has got a very large and young workforce that's coming to bear. It's going to be the largest workforce in the world by 2035. Right. And the big question is, how is this population, this what we call demographic dividend, this young, productive workforce, going to actually participate in creating long-term sustainable and inclusive growth? Right. And what we found is, at the moment, Africa is not growing its jobs fast enough. There are lessons they can learn from other economies which could halve the time it's going to take for Africa to reach what we call stable job employment. Right. And the key question is choosing job-creating sectors, not necessarily GDP-creating sectors, right, and then investing the skills, resources, and infrastructure to make them work.
Right. Okay. Now, from your study and what you found when you did your homework and did the groundwork, what sense did you get in terms of African government's ability to be able to identify those sectors that can create jobs and what needs to be done?
So we think what we've done is probably, for the first time, being able to create an overall picture of Africa's job market by sector. Right. What's interesting about it is, first of all, Africa's unemployment rate is only 9%.
That's the official.
That's the official unemployment rate. What we've then done underneath that is we have broken it down by sector into what we call stable wage-paying jobs, stable employment, and vulnerable jobs, which is people who are working but don't have a stable wage. Right. And 2/3 of this working population is in what we call this vulnerable category. So what we believe is that it's very important to accelerate the growth of job creation, to allow these people in vulnerable employment to move into stable employment. And when you look at countries in the rest of the world, like Thailand, like Brazil, like South Korea, who've managed to do this 3 times our rate, then we think it's absolutely possible for Africa to do this.
Yeah. But David, don't you think people will look at the 9% figure and think, hello, 9% unemployment in Africa? Come on. This has to be more a function of the lack of statistics than it is a function of actual numbers on the ground.
Well, you know, the purpose of the report was to very carefully go through a number of different countries, the ILO statistics, etc., and to glean what's come out of that. So we haven't looked at whether or not the reporting processes of governments are healthy or not. Okay. What we've rather tried to do is say, based on the statistics, we know that a lot of people are involved in agriculture, in manufacturing, in the retail and hospitality sector. Yeah. How do we actually unlock the potential there and actually invest in those sectors in order to create growth? Right. And there are good examples. So if you take, for example, manufacturing in Morocco, Morocco looked at the value chain of the automotive sector. It chose the places it could be competitive, and then it invested the skills, resources, and finance in those areas in order to succeed. Some of the debates, in our view, need to be revisited. So there's a lot of debate around resources. Only 1% of people in Africa are employed in the resource sector. So while that's going to be absolutely critical for Africa because it needs the foreign inflows in order to invest, it's not going to be the job-creating sector. Right. So I think the insight is less about is the exact number of employed or unemployed right. I think the question is, are we going to use the analysis and are countries going to use it to focus on the right sectors and to invest in the right ways?
Right. Now, you were quite thorough in this survey because you looked at 1,300 companies across 5 countries across Africa and with dozens of business leaders and policymakers. Now, in terms of the strategies of trying to unlock this potential, just give us a sense of what you're recommending here.
Well, there were, first of all, remarkably consistent findings across countries in terms of the barriers. Right. The barriers that companies experience, irrespective, relate to: is the environment macro-politically stable? Secondly, is there access to finance? And thirdly, is there sufficient infrastructure? And those are the top 3 issues that people come up with. Remarkably, none of those relate to skills. And our estimates, when we look at them, actually suggest that Africa, by 2020, 48% of people will have a secondary or tertiary degree. Right. When you dive into the skills issue, almost half of the population will have a secondary or tertiary degree. When you then probe on the skills issue, what people say is we want people who have the right experience. So the question's going to be, how do we take this educated group of people, give them the vocational experience so that they can participate in the economy.
What's your overall sense when you look at everything that you found? Is Africa going to be able to create this potential number of jobs that you're talking about?
Well, the issue is whether Africa acts now or waits. What we did is we took specific opportunities in manufacturing, retail and hospitality, and in agriculture. Things like Africa has one of the largest uncultivated pieces of land. Right. Are they going to actually take that benefit and develop it or not? And under reasonably conservative assumptions, what you find is that Africa can get there. Instead of 2066, when you'd have stable employment levels that would mirror the rest of the world, you can do it by 2033. But you have to start now. And you have to start now by looking at the sectors where you can be competitive, putting the infrastructure, skills, and finance in place to make those happen. And you can't do it piece by piece. You can't solve finance for the whole economy. You can't solve infrastructure for the whole economy, but you can solve it for the places where jobs are going to be. And that's what we're saying is different. A job strategy is not a GDP strategy, and that's where people need to focus.
I would imagine the bulk of the work would have to be done by the governments. What else needs to be done? Is there anything the private sector needs to do from what you're recommending?
Well, as I said, one of the issues in Africa is that savings rates are relatively low. And a lot of the savings actually exist in the more private sector enterprises. So there is a role, absolutely, for private sector to have, once they have the confidence, to invest in these countries. But at the end of the day, both entities, governments and private sector, are going to have to work together. Yeah. Government's going to have to create the environment and the incentives in the places where jobs are created. Yeah. And the private sector is going to have to come and work with government to actually invest their money and unlock those opportunities.
Is that the premise of the numbers that you have given us here?
The premise of the numbers that we've given there is absolutely in that spirit.